Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? The question drifted quietly through the dust-laden air of forward operating base vigilance, caught somewhere between the thrum of generators and the whispering wind outside. It wasn't just indifference. It was a kind of collective blindness. Captain Eva Rostova stood motionless near the back of the briefing tent, her posture disciplined but invisible, her presence swallowed by the noise and hierarchy of men too loud to notice silence. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. It was a cocktail of stale coffee, diesel fumes, and nervous sweat. 100 small, tired details that spoke of soldiers waiting for orders they didn't yet understand. Beyond the tent walls, the Zarkin wind moaned across the mountains, a sound so constant it became a pulse, a reminder that nature didn't care for rank or insignia. Eva's fingers moved across her data pad, her thumb steady despite the tremor in the ground beneath her boots. A small red notification blinked in the corner of the screen. She stared at it, frowning, scrolling through fuel logs, pressure readings, and cross-referenced manifests. Something wasn't right. The data was whispering a warning, one that no one in this tent seemed willing to hear. The tent flap burst open with theatrical force. Cold air poured in, scattering papers and conversation alike. General Marcus Thorne entered as if he were breaching an enemy compound. His boots thudded against the packed dirt floor. The sound was a command in itself, "Look at me." He didn't just walk into a room, he occupied it. Eva didn't lift her head, not yet. Thorne was every inch the textbook general, barrel-chested, medals glittering, eyes sharp with confidence earned through decades of combat. His presence drew the light, drew the air, drew the room's attention until there was none left for anyone else. Behind him trailed his aide, Major Kalen Vance, polished and smirking, the reflection of borrowed authority. "All right, settle down," Thorne boomed. He didn't need a mic. His voice had the weight of artillery. "I'm here to make sure this base is ready to bite when the time comes. Reports from Langley say the locals are getting bold. I want to see teeth, not paperwork." His words hit like shells, loud, forceful, rehearsed. The kind of speech that stirred adrenaline but dulled thought. Around Eva, officers nodded, muttered approval. Thorne's reputation preceded him, a warfighter who believed that wars were won by men shouting louder than the storm. Eva's gaze stayed fixed on her tablet. The small red icon continued to pulse. It wasn't an error. It wasn't a fluke. It was a signature, a trace of contamination in the high-altitude turbine fuel reserves destined for Outpost Griffin, the most remote and vulnerable position on the ridge. A half-degree deviation in specific gravity, microscopic, invisible to anyone not looking for it. But Eva was looking. Thorne slammed his fist on the table. Coffee mugs jumped, pencils rolled. "We are the tip of the spear," he barked, "and I will make sure that spear is sharp. That means readiness, that means resolve, and that means our support staff." His eyes swept the room with a faint smirk. "Keep the coffee hot and the numbers straight." Laughter, a few forced chuckles from the front row, sycophants trained to echo. Major Vance laughed the loudest. The general's joke wasn't funny, but it didn't have to be. Eva's expression didn't change. She wasn't a soldier who laughed to survive in rooms like this. She was a soldier who survived because she didn't. The red pulse on her tablet blinked again. Her thumb moved faster now, her mind mapping cross-data with atmospheric logs. Temperature drop projections, pressure drift during delivery, fuel density fluctuations that couldn't be explained by weather or transport vibration. She'd seen this kind of anomaly once before, years ago, in a quiet file buried under an incident report that no one was ever supposed to read. Sabotage. The word formed quietly in her mind, like a shadow slipping through a door. Thorne continued his speech, something about the warrior spirit and the unassailable lethality of the American soldier. His voice filled the room, but his words rolled off her like static. She was already far away, calculating failure chains. If the fuel froze at high altitude, the turbines would choke, power would fail, the sensors would go blind. The men at Griffin would die not from bullets but from cold and silence. The wind outside rose, pushing against the tent walls. The canvas strained and creaked. Eva looked up for the first time, her eyes sweeping the room. Faces, tired, proud, unaware. Men who believed their survival rested on the general's booming confidence rather than the quiet diligence of people like her. She wanted to speak. She wanted to interrupt the theater, to show them the danger sitting quietly on their supply line. But she didn't. Not yet. The briefing ended with applause, the kind that came from relief, not inspiration. Officers dispersed, chattering in clusters. General Thorne stayed behind, basking in his circle of senior staff. Major Vance hovered like a shadow, intercepting anyone who tried to approach. Eva waited. Timing mattered more than courage. When the crowd thinned, she stepped forward. "Major Vance," she said evenly, "I need a moment with the general." Vance turned, his smirk already forming. His eyes swept over her uniform, stopping on the captain's bars as if they were dirt. "The general's on a tight schedule, Captain. He's reviewing combat readiness, not supply requests." "This can't wait for a report," she replied, her voice calm, measured, the tone of someone who'd already decided to be ignored and would continue anyway. "There's a critical issue with the JP-8 fuel reserves at Outpost Griffin. The supply integrity is compromised." Vance exhaled a short, amused breath. "You're serious. You're coming to a 3-star general with fuel math." "When the temperature drops tonight, it'll gel," she said. "The generators will stall. Backup will fail. The outpost will lose power and heat." "And when that happens," Vance said, his condescension sharpening, "the engineers will fix it. That's what they're for. This is a combat command, Captain, not a garage." Before Eva could answer, Thorne's voice cut through the air like a whip. "What's going on here?" The small circle of officers fell silent. The general's presence was an impact you could feel in your chest. Vance straightened instantly. "Just a minor logistical issue, sir. Nothing requiring your attention." Thorne's glare fixed on Eva. "You're the quartermaster." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "I am, sir," she said. "Then maybe you should remember your job. I just spent half an hour reminding everyone that we fight wars with courage, not calculators. What exactly is your problem, Captain?" Eva met his eyes without flinching. "The fuel delivered to Outpost Griffin is off-spec. My analysis indicates contamination with a paraffinic compound. It will crystallize at sub-zero temperatures. If that happens, the turbines and generators will fail completely." For a heartbeat silence, then laughter. It was loud, dismissive, and sharp as gravel. "A catastrophic failure risk," Thorne mocked. "Captain, I've got green berets on that ridge, men who eat catastrophic risks for breakfast. You're telling me jet fuel's our biggest threat?" "No, sir," she said softly. "I'm telling you the fuel was deliberately contaminated." The word hung in the air, deliberately. Something shifted in the tent, a flicker of unease. Even Vance's smirk faltered. Thorne's face hardened. "That's a serious accusation, Captain. You'd better have more than a feeling from your little screen." "I have data from 3 independent logs," she replied. "Cross-correlated and verified. The contamination signature matches." "Matches nothing," he snapped. "You're seeing ghosts because you're scared of responsibility. Do you know what's at stake here? That ridge is the linchpin of this defense line. You think I'll ground an outpost because a supply officer got nervous about her fuel mix?" "I think," she said, her tone level, "you're already losing that ridge, sir. You just don't know it yet." The air in the tent froze. Officers pretended to shuffle papers, to look busy, to not exist. Thorne's voice dropped to a low growl. "Get out." "Sir." "Get out, go count your beans. And if anything breaks, I'll hold you personally responsible for not fixing it. But don't ever come into my command tent again with this kind of nonsense. Is that clear?" "Yes, General." She turned sharply, her salute crisp, her steps measured. The silence followed her out like a curse. Outside, the wind was stronger now, not a whisper but a howl. Dust rose from the valley floor, and the horizon darkened with the bruised color of an approaching storm. Eva stopped near the perimeter fence, the cold biting through her uniform. The mountains loomed ahead, white-capped and merciless. Somewhere up there in the gathering blizzard sat Outpost Griffin, and a red blinking warning light no one but her had seen. She exhaled slowly, the breath turning to vapor. He had given her an order, but he hadn't understood what kind of orders she truly followed. That night, as the storm rolled over the valley, the first signal blinked out. A small amber icon on the tactical map inside the command tent, then another. "Sir," a comms technician said nervously, "we just lost Griffin's thermal feed." General Thorne looked up from his maps. "Get them on the line." Static answered. Within minutes, panic crept through the room, quiet, restrained, but real. Sensor data flickered, died. Communications went dark. The storm had swallowed everything. And then, faint through the interference, came a voice, fractured, desperate. "Maingen is down, fuel lines frozen, trying backup. Same problem, we're going dark." Silence. The amber light turned red. General Thorne's fist hit the table hard enough to rattle radios. "She said it," he muttered. "The damn quartermaster. She said this would happen." For the first time, the warrior who thought he feared nothing realized there were enemies you couldn't shoot, only listen to. And somewhere, moving through that storm, a quiet figure had already decided not to wait for permission. Captain Eva Rostova, dismissed, disregarded, forgotten, was already in motion. And the mountain was waiting. How far would you go when no one believed you? The question lingered like frost in the air as Eva walked through the skeletal maze of tents and steel containers that made up forward operating base vigilance. The wind screamed against the walls, driving sand and ice through every seam. Around her, the base churned with chaotic energy, engines roaring, soldiers shouting, generators coughing to life. To most, it was just another storm warning. To her, it was the beginning of a chain reaction she could no longer stop. She moved fast, her boots sinking into the slush as she crossed the motor pool. Men rushed past, focused on routine, blind to consequence. They saluted half-heartedly, not knowing that the quiet woman passing them carried more authority than anyone in this valley. She wasn't supposed to exist beyond her paperwork, her logistics ledgers, her bean counting. But she had always been something else, something that moved unseen when systems broke and chains of command failed. Inside the motor pool, the air was thick with the smell of grease and diesel. Mechanics worked frantically on half-frozen vehicles, their breath steaming in the cold. Sparks lit the shadows like fireflies. Eva's eyes swept the hangar, searching until she saw a pair of boots sticking out from beneath a heavy armored truck. She stopped beside them. "Sergeant Vance," she said. The boots jerked. A man slid out from under the chassis, his hands coated in black oil, his breath fogging. He was broad-shouldered, young, and unmistakably tired, the kind of soldier who fixed problems instead of talking about them. His name patched read Vance, Elias Vance, younger brother of the general's aide. "Ma'am," he said, wiping his hands, "not a great time. Everything with a diesel engine is freezing up. We're losing injectors left and right." "I don't need a diesel," Eva replied. "I need the Lynx." Eli blinked. "The Lynx, that prototype we gutted for parts." She shook her head. "You rebuilt it for high-altitude recon, didn't you? Multi-fuel turbine, low compression ratio, wide track base." Eli frowned, cautious. "Technically, yes, but it's a hangar queen, temperamental as hell. We use it for test runs, not suicide missions." "Is it fueled?" she asked. He hesitated, reading something in her tone, something that made him straighten. "Yeah, but even if it runs, where could you possibly go in this weather?" "Outpost Griffin." The words fell like stones between them. Eli stared at her, eyes wide with disbelief. "Ma'am, no one's making that climb tonight. The trail's gone. You'll vanish in that blizzard before you're halfway up." "They're already vanishing," she said. "Their fuel lines are frozen. Their backup generators are failing. If we wait until morning, they'll be dead." He shook his head slowly. "You're serious?" "I don't have time to convince you." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Even if you make it halfway, that trail will kill you. Crevasses, wind shear, no visibility." Eva looked back at him, her eyes steady and unreadable. "Then I'll make it halfway." Something about her calm cut through the noise of the hangar. There was no drama in her tone, no anger. Just truth, the kind that made men listen. Eli hesitated, then sighed and reached for his parka. "You'll need a mechanic." Her reply was simple: "Get your gear." While he moved to gather tools, Eva headed toward the restricted storage section, a wire cage most soldiers didn't even know existed. The security pad blinked red until she entered a long, complex code, followed by a biometric scan. The light turned green with a soft click. The NCO on duty froze, confused. No one had access to that cage except command officers and auditors. Whoever she wasn't just logistics. Inside, Eva moved with surgical precision. She grabbed 2 advanced cold-weather survival suits, military black with microheating layers, the kind reserved for special operations. Then climbing harnesses, ice axes, and a compact case labeled thermal regulator, type VII. From a small refrigerated locker, she retrieved a sealed metal box marked with a biohazard warning. She didn't look at it long, she already knew what it was. A set of thermal ignition cells, experimental tech designed to keep volatile fuel lines from freezing. They hummed faintly with internal charge. When she returned, Eli was waiting beside the Lynx, a squat, low-slung beast of metal and aggression. Its turbine engine emitted a high-pitched whine, like a jet held in a cage. Steam rolled off its exhaust as snow melted on contact. Eli raised an eyebrow when he saw the equipment she carried. "That's not standard issue." "It's not supposed to be," she said. As he pulled on the survival suit, warmth spread instantly through the microfibers. He exhaled, impressed despite himself. "This gear, where did you even?" "Classified," she said. "Mount the toolkit on the rear deck, secure everything, we'll need it." He obeyed without another word. The turbine roared to life, echoing through the hangar. Soldiers turned to look. No one drove the Lynx at night, let alone in a storm. Eva strapped into the driver's seat, adjusting dials, flipping switches in a sequence that looked more like ritual than habit. "You've driven one of these before?" Eli asked over the noise. She didn't answer. He noticed her hands, steady, precise, the movements of someone who didn't just understand the machine but felt it. When she shifted gears, the Lynx responded like it recognized her. "Tell them to open the door," she said. Eli keyed his radio. "Control, we're opening Bay 3. The massive steel doors groaned upward. The instant the gap appeared, the blizzard screamed through it, a wall of white chaos. Snow blasted across the hangar floor and men shielded their faces. Eva didn't wait. She jammed the throttle forward. The Lynx surged ahead like a released predator, its treads biting deep into the ice as they vanished into the storm. The mountain swallowed them whole. The world outside was a storm of sound and motion. Snow fell sideways, slicing through the air. The Lynx crawled along invisible trails, guided by nothing but GPS and instinct. Inside, the cockpit glowed faintly from instrument light, illuminating their faces in pale blue. Eli gripped the support handle until his knuckles whitened. He'd driven tanks across deserts, Humvees through ambush zones, but this felt different. This wasn't movement through danger. This was danger. The wind roared like an angry god, shaking the frame, trying to throw them into the abyss. Yet Eva's expression never changed. Her eyes flicked between gauges and horizon, her hands light on the controls. She wasn't fighting the storm, she was listening to it, adjusting throttle and weight with small, precise movements. Every correction seemed to happen before the slip began. "Your left track's losing grip," Eli shouted over the howl. "I know," she replied, voice calm. "Hold tight." The vehicle skidded sideways, metal groaning. She feathered the power, letting the tracks bite again. The Lynx clawed forward. Its turbine screamed, echoing through the mountains like a mechanical heart. Eli glanced at her. "You're not just logistics, are you?" She didn't answer. The road disappeared beneath drifts taller than the vehicle. Visibility dropped to almost zero. GPS flickered, useless. They were climbing blind. The only sound was the rhythmic churn of tracks and the wind's unending rage. Then a jolt. The front right track dropped suddenly. The vehicle tilted hard, sliding sideways toward darkness. Eli's stomach lurched. "Crevasse, we're going over." Eva didn't panic. Her hand slammed the differential lock, cutting power to the slipping side. With a hard twist of the throttle, she spun the Lynx around its left tread. For a terrifying second, they hovered between gravity and death, and then the tracks caught. The vehicle slammed down hard, rocking back onto solid ground. Eli's heart hammered. He looked at her wide-eyed. How did you even know to do that?" "I didn't," she said simply. "I guessed right." He let out a shaky laugh. "That was a tank commander's move." "Desperation move," she corrected softly. "Same thing." They drove in silence for another mile, crawling inch by inch through a landscape of ice and ghosts. The storm shrieked louder, punishing. Every gust felt like the hand of something ancient trying to erase them. Finally, the path narrowed to nothing but jagged stone. Eva eased the throttle down, bringing the Lynx to a halt. She killed the engine. The sudden silence was immense. Eli looked at her confused. "Why stop?" "The rest is on foot." He followed her gaze. Ahead lay a steep incline, near vertical in places, vanishing into a wall of swirling white. Somewhere beyond it was Griffin. Somewhere beyond it were freezing men who didn't know help was coming. She unbuckled and stepped out into the cold. The wind hit like a hammer. For a second she leaned into it, letting it cut through her, reminding her what waited if she failed. They dressed in full gear, harnesses, climbing spikes, survival packs. Eva handed Eli a coil of rope, clipped her carabiner, and began the climb. Every movement was precise, deliberate. The wind clawed at them, trying to tear them loose. She didn't flinch. Halfway up, they paused behind a rock outcropping. Visibility was near zero. Eli turned toward her, his voice muffled by his mask. "I need to ask, what's that case?" He pointed to the small, black polymer box clipped to her harness. A faint metallic emblem glinted through the frost. Eva looked down at it, her eyes unreadable. For a moment, the wind was the only sound between them. "It's my authorization," she said finally. Eli frowned. "Authorization for what?" "For everything," she said simply. He squinted at the emblem, and when the snow shifted, he saw it clearly for the first time: an eagle, a shield, a circle of stars. The presidential seal. Eli felt his chest tighten. "Ma'am, what exactly are you?" Her gaze lifted toward the blizzard, toward the unseen outpost above them. "Someone who doesn't wait for permission." She turned back into the wind, driving her ice axe into the rock. The clang rang sharp and pure through the storm. Eli followed, wordless, because there was nothing left to say. He understood now. She wasn't here because of orders. She was here because failure wasn't an option she recognized. As they climbed, the storm grew worse. Snow packed into every seam of their gear. Ice formed on their goggles. The world became white and endless, directionless, but she kept going. Step, swing, breathe, step again. When they finally crested the ridge, the world changed. Outpost Griffin lay before them, a scattering of low, angular structures buried in snow. Dark, silent. The wind screamed across it like mourning. And yet, in the shadows, near the command bunker's door, movement. Figures, 6 of them. Human shapes wrapped in white camo, gliding through the snow like wraiths. Eli froze. "Ma'am." "I see them," Eva whispered. They weren't survivors. They were infiltrators moving with precision, with purpose. One knelt near the door, setting a charge. "They're here to finish the job," she said quietly, "and make sure no one reports it." Eli's heart pounded. He reached for his rifle, but she stopped him, one gloved hand on his arm. "Too loud, we do this quiet." Her voice was calm, controlled. From her pack she drew her rifle, an M4, modified and compact, fitted with a suppressor. Every motion was silent, practiced. From another pouch she handed him a sidearm, a Sig Sauer, black, heavy, deadly. He took it, feeling the cold steel through his gloves. "You're proficient?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "Then on my first shot, 2 on the right. Head or chest, don't miss." She didn't wait for agreement. She vanished into the snow like smoke. Eli swallowed hard, heart thundering, and took his position behind a half-buried generator. He steadied his breath. The wind howled. The enemy team knelt at the door, oblivious. A faint thump cracked through the storm, soft as a heartbeat. One man dropped. 2 more followed before the others even turned. Eli fired twice, measured, clean, final. His targets fell into the snow without sound. The last infiltrator spun, firing wildly into the white void. Muzzle flashes bloomed like dying stars. And then Eva appeared, not from where he aimed, but from the side, rising from the snow itself. One more suppressed shot. The man fell backward. Silence returned, heavy, absolute. 6 bodies, 6 ghosts erased by a storm. Eva stood still for a moment, scanning the horizon. Her rifle lowered. Her breathing was steady. No triumph, no relief, just focus. "Clear," she said softly. "Let's move." What does courage look like when no one's watching? The storm had swallowed everything, sound, color, even the sense of up or down. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. The only movement came from 2 figures wading through waist-deep snow toward a half-buried bunker, their bodies bowed against a wind that didn't care whether they lived or died. Eva Rostova led the way, every step a calculation. Her gloved hand brushed the icy steel of the command bunker's hatch. Beneath her mask, her breath came slow and controlled. She could feel the vibration of the mountain through her boots, the living pulse of something ancient and indifferent. Eli Vance followed close, pistol drawn, scanning the snow for any sign of more movement. The bodies of the infiltrators lay scattered behind them, half covered already, the wind erasing their presence from history. In minutes, it would be as if they'd never existed. "Charges are planted," he whispered, pointing to the hatch. "They were ready to blow it open." "Then we're not opening it from here," she replied. Eva knelt, her hands working with mechanical precision. She pulled a compact device from her pack, a small black cube with an array of fine probes. She connected it to the electronic lock. Tiny blue lights flickered to life across its surface, pulsing in a slow rhythm that mirrored her heartbeat. Eli watched, fascinated. It wasn't standard military tech. Whatever it was, it belonged to a world above his clearance. Within seconds, the heavy door clicked, sighed, and opened a fraction, just enough to let in the storm. A breath of warm air escaped, faint but real. "They're alive," Eva said quietly. They slipped inside. The change was instant. The howling wind became a muffled memory behind the door. The air was still, frigid but breathable. Their headlamps cut through the darkness, sweeping across narrow corridors lined with frost. Ice had claimed the metal walls, turning bolts and cables into sculptures of white glass. In the comms room, 4 men huddled together beneath emergency blankets. Their faces were pale and cracked with cold. One lifted his head weakly, eyes wide with disbelief. "Help." "Stay still," Eva said, kneeling beside him. Her voice softened, the calm of someone who had seen worse and survived. "You're safe now." She turned to Eli. "Get them into the survival suits, now." He unpacked the gear she'd brought, helping each man into the heated fabric. As warmth began to return to their bodies, faint color crept back into their cheeks. One of them, a lieutenant by the rank tab, tried to stand, shivering uncontrollably. The generator, it froze, we could. I know, Eva interrupted gently. We'll fix it. She rose and moved toward the engineering bay. The smell of burnt fuel and metal filled the air. The generator room was a graveyard of frozen pipes and seized machinery. The fuel tank was coated in a layer of ice thick as armor. She ran her hand along it, feeling the brittleness beneath her gloves. The contamination had done its work. The fuel had congealed into a waxy sludge. From her pack, she withdrew the small metal case she'd carried since leaving the base, the one Eli had noticed earlier. She placed it on a nearby console and opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in insulated foam, were three cylindrical devices, each no larger than a flashlight, each humming faintly with a low-frequency vibration. Thermal regulators, classified technology, self-heating, self-calibrating, capable of liquefying gelled hydrocarbons even in vacuum conditions. Only a handful of people on Earth had ever handled one. Eva inserted the first regulator into the main feed line, watching the frost recede in slow ripples. She worked quickly, her motions efficient, unhurried. When the last device clicked into place, she flipped a switch on the generator's control panel. The machine groaned. Then, like a heartbeat restarting after flatline, a rumble, a tremor, a spark. Lights flickered, faded, then burned steadily. The sound of turbines rising filled the bunker, low, powerful, alive. Eli appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide. "You did it." Eva didn't answer. She was already moving to another console, rerouting power to the sensor grid. One by one, systems came online. Radar arrays, comms nodes, perimeter defenses. On the screen, a field of static resolved into motion heat signatures. Dozens of them, moving through the pass below. "They're coming," Eli whispered. Eva's expression didn't change. "They think we're dead. And when they find out we're not, then we stop pretending." She turned to the nearest comms technician. "Get me a tight beam encryption to fob vigilance." The young man blinked, half-frozen fingers trembling over the controls. "Ma'am, our long-range dish is damaged. We can't transmit that far." "You can," she said, handing him a compact transceiver from her pack. "Use this. Route it through your uplink array. You'll have a 90-second window before the storm closes again." The tech stared at the device, then at her. This isn't standard issue." "Neither am I." He didn't ask questions after that. Within moments, a signal pulsed into the ether, a beam of encrypted data racing toward the base. The storm broke with the dawn. It didn't fade, it shattered. The clouds split open and sunlight spilled across the snow, harsh and blinding. The world below glowed gold and white, and cutting through it, the distant roar of rotors. General Thorne's helicopter descended like a dark bird, its blades slicing the air. Snow billowed up around it as it landed heavily on the helipad of Outpost Griffin. The general jumped out before the ramp was fully down, his aides scrambling behind him. He expected silence, he expected bodies. Instead, he found movement, life. The outpost was awake, lights blazing, heaters humming, soldiers alive and moving with purpose. The bodies of 6 enemy commandos lay in a neat row near the perimeter, their gear stripped and catalogued. Thorne stopped dead, stunned. His eyes tracked toward the bunker entrance, where a figure stood, her uniform coated in grime, her face streaked with cold. She was calmly running diagnostics on a console, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand as if she were at her desk instead of the edge of the world. "Captain Rostova," Thorne said, his voice unsure for the first time in years. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "Sir." What happened here?" Eva took a slow breath. "We had an equipment malfunction. It's been corrected." Thorne stepped closer. "And the hostiles?" "They were uninvited guests," she said simply. "We repelled a probe." He turned to his aide, who was pale, speechless, then back to her. "You repelled a probe. With what, Captain? You had 4 men left alive." "With what I had," she replied. His gaze fell on the table beside her, the enemy's gear neatly arranged. Suppressed weapons, climbing harnesses, encrypted radios. And there, clipped to her vest, catching the light, the small black case. The metallic seal on its surface gleamed unmistakably. Thorne froze. He knew that emblem. He'd seen it in classified briefings, on documents so sensitive they were burned after reading. The presidential seal, not decorative, not symbolic, functional. It was an authorization key. A direct line to power higher than his own. He looked back at her, and for the first time he truly saw her, not as a logistician, not as an officer buried in paperwork, but as something else entirely. A ghost, a weapon, a guardian sent to watch the cracks where war turned inward. "Who in God's name are you?" he asked, his voice low, almost reverent. Eva didn't answer immediately. She took a sip of coffee, exhaled, and set the cup down. "Someone who warned you." The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. It was Eli Vance who broke it, his voice steady, certain. "She's the reason we're all still alive, sir. She's the reason your spear's still sharp." Thorne turned, meeting Eli's eyes, and what he saw there stripped away whatever pride was left. Conviction, loyalty, respect earned not by rank but by survival. He looked back at Eva, the woman he'd dismissed, laughed at, humiliated in front of his men. The woman who had saved them all. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. He straightened his spine. The instinctive arrogance of rank softened into something older, recognition. Respect between warriors who understood that courage wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, unseen. He wanted to salute her, but he knew it would be wrong, a violation of the shadows she lived in. Instead, he gave a single nod. Slow, deliberate, a gesture not of authority but of apology. "Captain," he said, his voice thick with the weight of his error. "My apologies." Eva's expression didn't change, but there was the faintest flicker in her eyes, something human, tired, and almost kind. "Apology accepted," she said simply. Then she turned back to her screen. "General, the enemy column is moving through grid coordinates K17 to M20. They think the pass is unguarded. I suggest you rectify that assumption." Thorne swallowed hard. "You have my full cooperation." "You already did," she murmured without looking up. Hours later, sunlight stretched long across the Zarkin Mountains. The battle that followed was short, decisive, brutal. Acting on Rostova's precise coordinates, Thorne ordered 2 flights of A-10 Warthogs to sweep the pass. Their thunder rolled through the valleys, shattering the illusion of an easy victory. When the dust settled, the enemy's armored column was nothing but twisted steel and silence. The offensive had died before it began. Back at FOB Vigilance, relief rippled like a quiet wave. Men smiled for the first time in days. Radios carried laughter, weak but real. And in the command tent, General Thorne sat at his desk, no longer the roaring bull of a man he had been. His voice when he gave orders was measured, respectful. He glanced through the window across the snow-covered field to the figure standing alone by the helipad, Eva Rostova. The lynx she'd driven through hell sat beside her, coated in ice and glory. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't talking. She was cleaning her sidearm with slow, meticulous care. There was a serenity in the ritual, the quiet restoration after chaos. Each movement deliberate, reverent. It wasn't the act of maintenance. It was meditation, reflection. Thorne watched her, feeling something rare, humility. He turned to Major Vance, who stood silent beside him, pale and chastened. "Kalen," Thorne said quietly, "get me a full audit of every fuel shipment in this sector for the last 6 months. I want it by 800. "Sir, that's thousands of barrels." "I don't care, check every one. And from this moment on, Captain Rostova gets anything she asks for. Equipment, personnel, clearance, no questions, no paperwork. If she asks for the keys to my helicopter, give them to her." Vance swallowed. "Yes, sir." Thorne turned back toward the window. The sun caught the edge of the lynx, glinting like a metal. Eva holstered her pistol, stood for a long moment, and looked toward the mountains, the place where she'd nearly died to save strangers who doubted her. The wind tugged at her uniform, carrying the last whispers of the storm away. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just breathed, quiet, steady, present. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. What happens to the heroes, no one is allowed to thank. The morning after the storm, forward operating base vigilance looked like a photograph of exhaustion. The air was sharp and clean, the kind that followed catastrophe narrowly avoided. Soldiers moved slower than usual, not from fatigue, but reverence, as if they were walking through sacred ground without knowing why. Snow still blanketed the ridges, and the sun rose like a shy guest, hesitant to reveal the scars beneath the white. The world looked peaceful again, but Eva Rostova knew better. Peace was only what remained after noise had nowhere left to go. She walked the perimeter alone, her boots crunching on frozen gravel. Her body ached not from injury but from the long strain of purpose, the kind that settled deep in the bones, where no amount of rest could reach. She spent most of the night at Griffin overseeing recovery, cataloging what had been stolen and what had been planted. The sabotage wasn't random. It was coordinated, deliberate, a quiet war fought beneath the surface of the official one. Her hands were steady, but her mind wasn't still. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the 6 white-clad infiltrators, faceless in death, professionals, trained, paid to erase evidence. Somewhere, someone had signed off on their mission, someone inside. And that, more than the storm, chilled her. A gust of wind pushed at her shoulders as she neared the edge of the helipad. Below, the valley stretched endlessly, beautiful, indifferent. She pulled her jacket tighter. For a brief moment, she let herself feel the smallness of her existence compared to the vastness of the mountains. It was grounding, necessary. She needed to remember she was still human, even if the world preferred she was. Behind her, boots crunched in the snow. General Thorne approached, his breath visible in the cold. Gone was the swagger, the bombast. The man who'd once filled entire rooms now seemed smaller, heavier, as if his metals had doubled in weight overnight. "Captain," he said, stopping beside her. "General," she replied without turning. They stood in silence for a long while, both looking out over the same horizon. The air between them was clean but fragile, the kind of silence that carried understanding instead of words. "I had my aide run that audit," Thorne said finally. "You were right about everything." Eva didn't respond. She didn't need to. He continued, the words leaving him like confession. "We traced the contaminated fuel back to a contractor out of Tashkent, shell company, false manifests. The trail goes nowhere." "Someone wanted it that way," she said softly. "Someone inside," Thorne admitted, his voice low. "We'll never prove it, not through channels." She turned her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. "Then don't go through channels." Thorne gave a small, humorless laugh. "I figured you'd say that." The wind carried their breath away before either could speak again. Finally, Thorne shifted his stance, glancing at her. "You saved my men, Captain. You saved me from myself." Her expression didn't change. "That's not why I came here." "I know," he said, "but it's still true." Another pause. Longer this time. The distant hum of generators filled the air like static. Thorne's gaze dropped to the small black case still clipped to her vest, the one he now knew better than to ask about. He exhaled slowly. "When I laughed at you in that briefing, I thought I understood command. Turns out I only understood control, not responsibility. You made me remember the difference." She gave a faint nod. "Responsibility means staying silent when silence is safer. Control means pretending silence is wisdom." Thorne smiled faintly. "You sound like my conscience." "I'm not," she said. "I'm just here when it stops working." For a moment, he didn't know whether to laugh or salute. He did neither. Later, in the command tent, the rhythm of recovery began to take hold. The atmosphere was subdued but functional. Officers moved with purpose. Radio chatter replaced shouting. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter lifted off, carrying the bodies of the infiltrators to whatever nameless morgue classified corpses ended up in. Major Kalen Vance stood at a workstation, his hands shaking slightly as he reviewed a digital audit log. His arrogance was gone, replaced by something close to guilt. The report in front of him confirmed what his brother Elias had said over encrypted comms. The contamination wasn't just bad fuel. It was sabotage woven into their lifelines. Someone had weaponized logistics. When Eva entered, he straightened instinctively, his posture crisp but uncertain. "Captain." "Major," she said, her tone neutral. He swallowed. "I wanted to say." "Don't," she interrupted gently. "You don't owe me words, just better work." He nodded quickly, embarrassed. "Yes, ma'am." Her gaze drifted over the glowing maps and manifests. Lines of data, fuel shipments, supply chains stretching across continents. To most, it was paperwork. To her, it was a battlefield. Every number told a story of human lives depending on the invisible details no one celebrated. She wondered how many others like her were out there, fighting wars in the shadows of spreadsheets and manifests. "Captain," Vance said quietly, "I heard they're sending an investigation team from command." Eva's eyes lifted from the screen. "They won't find anything." He frowned. "How can you be sure?" "Because they're not meant to," she said. "Investigations aren't about truth, Major. They're about control." Vance hesitated. "Then what happens next?" She closed her data pad and looked at him, really looked. "Next, you keep counting beans. Only this time count the ones that matter." He didn't understand it then, but later, those words would haunt him. That night the base settled under a fragile calm. Floodlights glowed against the snow, throwing long, wavering shadows. Inside the small quarters assigned to her, Eva sat alone at the edge of her bunk. The room was bare. A cot, a metal locker, a folded flag above the bed. Her rifle rested on the table beside a cup of untouched tea. The silence was a living thing. It pressed against her ribs until she finally spoke aloud, her voice barely a whisper. "You're not done yet, Eva." It wasn't pride, it wasn't arrogance, it was exhaustion shaped into duty. She reached for the black case. The seal gleamed faintly in the dim light. Her gloved thumb brushed across it, tracing the engraved eagle, the circle of stars. It wasn't a symbol of power to her, it was a reminder of burden. The kind of burden no one thanked you for. She opened it. Inside lay a small encrypted data drive already active. The screen on her tablet blinked. New instructions. No signature, no source, just coordinates. Her next mission was waiting. Eva exhaled slowly, her breath fogging in the cold air. Somewhere beyond those numbers, another outpost, another fracture, another invisible war waited to be mended. She felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders, familiar, heavy, necessary. She closed the case, locking it with a soft click. Outside, footsteps approached, a knock on the door. "Come in," she said. Eli Vance entered, his uniform still dusted with snow. He looked younger without the grease and grime, but the lines around his eyes had deepened. "Ma'am, thought you might want an update." "Report." "Griffin's systems are stable, communications restored, all survivors accounted for. Enemy dead have been identified or at least their equipment traced. Nothing matches regular units. No insignia, no origin." "Ghosts," Eva said. He nodded, "Pretty much." He hesitated, shifting awkwardly. "Permission to speak freely." "Always." "I've been around soldiers my whole life, ma'am. My brother, my father before him. But I've never seen anyone do what you did. The way you moved, the way you knew. You could have walked away after the general dismissed you. You didn't." Her gaze was steady. Because I wasn't here for his approval. I know, but still, he exhaled, searching for words. Why keep doing this if no one knows? For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she looked past him, out the small window where the last light of day was bleeding into dusk. Because someone has to. The simplicity of it silenced him. He understood now that she didn't serve for medals or commendations. She served because the alternative was chaos. Because every time someone looked away, something vital broke. She stood, crossing the small room, and handed him a folded document. You're transferring back to Griffin. You'll oversee the reinstallation of secure fuel storage. No one touches the system without you knowing. He took the paper, surprised. You're leaving. I was never here, she said softly. His eyes dropped to the case on her belt, the one she never seemed to part with. He understood then. Is this what it's like, he asked quietly, being one of whatever you are? Her expression softened, almost sad. It's like being a ghost people still depend on. He nodded slowly, his voice low. You saved them, ma'am. You saved all of us. Then don't waste it, she said. Make it mean something. He left quietly, closing the door behind him. Eva sat back down, the weight of solitude settling again. Her eyes drifted to the flag above her bunk, its fabric still, untouched by wind. She thought about all the men who would go home and tell stories of the storm, the battle, the victory. None of them would mention her. None of them would even know. And that was fine. That was the job. An hour later, she stood on the flight line. The Lynx had been towed back, cleaned, refueled. It sat gleaming under the floodlights, a quiet monument to survival. The air was bitter, the stars sharp and bright. Somewhere behind her, the base PA announced radio checks, night patrol rotations, the hum of life continuing. A chopper waited on standby, unmarked, quiet, its rotors idling softly. Eva pulled her hood tighter and took one last look at the mountains. The wind tugged at her sleeve like a child asking her to stay. But she couldn't. The mission never stopped. It just changed locations. She climbed into the helicopter. The crew didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. Orders came from above their pay grade, above anyone's pay grade. The door slid shut. The rotors rose in a rhythmic crescendo. As the base shrank below her, Eva watched the lights fade until they were only pinpricks against the dark valley. She thought of Thorne, of Eli, of the men who'd lived because she refused to be silenced. Then she thought of all the others, the ones she hadn't reached in time. She whispered their names in her mind, one by one, until the noise of the blades drowned them out. The helicopter banked east, toward the coordinates glowing on her tablet. Another storm waited there unseen. And as the wind carried her into the dark, she felt the same quiet truth she'd carried through every mission, the one no oath, no medal, no flag could contain. Courage doesn't need witnesses. It just needs to keep showing up. How do you keep fighting when the war is invisible? The helicopter cut through the darkness like a pulse, its rotors thumping a low, steady rhythm against the thin mountain air. No markings, no call signs, just matte paint and silence. Inside, Eva Rostova sat strapped into her seat, her eyes fixed on the tablet resting in her gloved hands. The coordinates glowed in soft blue light, shifting slightly as the aircraft changed heading. 37 degrees north, 64 degrees east, somewhere between the fractured borders of nowhere and forgotten. Outside the window, the world was empty, jagged peaks and rolling clouds. No lights, no roads, only the whisper of altitude. She, left forward operating base vigilance 2 hours ago, left behind faces that still didn't know her name. The storm had ended there, but another one had begun here, quieter, colder, infinitely more dangerous. She looked down at the small black case beside her, the presidential seal catching a faint reflection from the cabin light. To anyone else, it was a badge of unimaginable authority. To her, it was a burden that weighed more than the rifle on her back. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, a low murmur through static. "Ma'am, we're 15 miles from drop point. Weather's clear, but there's interference on the comms bands. Unusual stuff, not the usual storm noise." "Electronic masking?" she asked. "Could be, or somebody doesn't want company." Eva nodded once. "Keep altitude, no external lights. I'll jump from 3,000. There was a brief silence. "Understood, ma'am." She checked her parachute harness, then the backup. Every strap exact. Every motion practiced until it lived in muscle memory. No sound but the rhythmic hum of the engines and the whisper of fabric. She glanced again at the tablet. The encrypted briefing scrolled across the screen in a series of terse lines. Objective: verify sabotage origin. Target: logistic node 27, disguised as civilian refinery near Amrak Pass. Secondary: identify internal leak. Authorization: level Omega 7. Mission lead: Rostova E. Solo. Solo, the word looked heavier than it should. She'd done solo before. She knew the silence that followed you after extraction, the echo of your own heartbeat when no one came to meet you. She closed the tablet, clipped it to her harness, and let her mind fall quiet. The door light flicked green. Cold air roared in as the side hatch opened, biting through the cabin like knives. She stepped into the wind without hesitation, the night swallowing her whole. The fall was freedom. For a few seconds there was no mission, no ghosts, no burdens, only velocity and air. The mountains below were silent teeth in the moonlight. She counted silently, 32, 33, then pulled. The chute bloomed above her with a whisper instead of a snap, black canopy blending perfectly with the sky. She drifted through the thin air, steering gently toward the valley floor. Her eyes scanned for heat blooms through the goggles' faint glow. Nothing. No movement. That was good. And wrong. The ground came up fast. She landed in a crouch, rolled, and pulled the chute in with practiced precision, burying it under snow. Her boots sank into the powder, the silence absolute except for the ticking of cooling metal somewhere distant, the sound of machines pretending to sleep. The refinery wasn't on any official map. It sat wedged in the shadow of two cliffs, a sprawl of steel skeletons and dim floodlights. To anyone passing overhead, it looked abandoned. But Eva knew better. The fuel that had crippled Griffin came from here. Someone had turned a supply chain into a weapon. She checked her rifle, adjusted the suppressor, and moved forward. The snow muffled every step. She was a shadow among structures, a breath among giants. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of her movements, calm, deliberate, unstoppable. At the outer fence, she crouched. The perimeter sensors were old Soviet designs, but someone had upgraded them recently. She spotted new fiber lines half buried in frost, leading toward the main gate. This wasn't civilian infrastructure anymore. She removed a small device from her pocket, a pulse injector, no larger than a coin. With a quick press, it sent a silent burst of interference through the circuit. The fence lights flickered once, then died. She slipped through the gap and vanished into the dark. Inside, the refinery was half alive. Pipes groaned with half pressure. Valves hissed softly. The air smelled of oil and cold metal. She followed the smell deeper until she found the storage yard, rows of fuel bladders identical to the one at Griffin, each stamped with the same supply code, VN47. She crouched beside one and ran a scanner over the surface. The reading spiked a paraffinic contamination, identical pattern. This was the source, but the question was what? It was who? A voice broke the silence behind her. Figured someone would come eventually. Eva spun, weapon raised. The figure that stepped from behind the tank was tall, wrapped in a weather-stained parka. His rifle hung low, not quite threatening. He lifted a gloved hand in a slow, careful gesture. "Easy," he said. "You're not here to shoot me. If you were, I'd already be dead." Her sights didn't waver. "Identify yourself." "Name's Jard Cole," he said. Used to work intel for logistics command, till I found something I wasn't supposed to. Show your hands. He did, no weapon, just the same exhaustion she'd seen in too many good people who'd stared too long at rot. You're Rostova, he said quietly, the ghost they send when the machine starts to eat itself. She kept the rifle trained on his chest. You know my name. I know your work, heard about Griffin. His voice softened. You were supposed to die there. The ones who spiked the fuel, they wanted that outpost gone. They wanted the commander blamed. Clean, efficient. Why? Because vigilance sits on the corridor for the northern pipeline, he said. Whoever controls that corridor controls the funding for the entire defense network. Someone's siphoning billions through shell contracts, dirty fuel, ghost shipments, fake maintenance budgets. You were getting too close. They tried to wipe the slate. She studied him for a long moment. Prove it. He tossed her a small drive encased in frost. It's all in there. Contracts, signatures, coded authorizations. You'll recognize some of the names. She caught it, slipping it into her vest. And you. I don't last long once they know I talked. He smiled faintly without humor. You'll understand. Come with me, she said. He shook his head. I'd slow you down. The sound of boots echoed faintly through the metal yard, approaching fast, disciplined, wrong. Not refinery workers, soldiers. Jard exhaled, too late anyway. He lifted his rifle and turned toward the noise. Eva didn't argue. She melted into the shadows beside him. Figures emerged from the fog, 6, maybe 7, moving in a wedge formation. No insignia. The same pattern as the commandos at Griffin. She whispered, suppressors. He nodded once, standard kit. Then make it count. The first man rounded the corner, 2 muffled pops. He fell without a sound. Then chaos, quiet, efficient, deadly. Eva moved like water, every motion a decision made long before the trigger pulled. The world shrank to pulses of light and breath. When it ended, only steam rose from the snow. Jard leaned against a pipe, blood on his shoulder. You should go. She looked at him. You're hit. Not bad enough to stop you. They'll send more. She hesitated just a heartbeat, then pressed a data patch against his wound, activating its seal. If you survive, burn everything. This site's compromised. He gave a weak nod. Good hunting, Captain. She turned away, slipping back through the maze of pipes. Behind her, a muffled explosion rolled through the valley. The refinery burned, not spectacularly, just enough to erase evidence. Enough to make it all vanish, like every truth she ever uncovered. She reached the extraction ridge hours later, moving uphill through wind and smoke. The helicopter arrived on schedule, a black silhouette against the pale dawn. She climbed aboard, body trembling from exhaustion but eyes still alert. The pilot looked back, everything secure. As much as it ever is, she replied. He didn't ask more. In her line of work, details were currency too expensive to spend. As the aircraft lifted off, she opened the drive Jard had given her. Lines of encrypted text filled the screen, contracts, signatures, coded authorizations. One name repeated more than once, a name she didn't expect. Marcus Thorne. She stared at it, unmoving, the hum of the rotors filling the silence. The coordinates she'd received hadn't been random. They led her to this, to a truth sharp enough to draw blood. Either Thorne was part of the network, or someone wanted her to believe he was. The trap wasn't in the refinery, it was in the message. Her fingers tightened around the tablet. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she closed it, the screen going dark. The helicopter banked west, toward friendly airspace, though she no longer knew what friendly meant. The sun rose slowly behind her, painting the mountains gold. She watched it through the window, distant, unreachable, almost cruel in its beauty. In that light, she saw her reflection, the tired eyes of a woman who lived in the spaces between wars. The kind who saved the living and buried the truth. For the first time in years, she felt something close to doubt, a fracture in her certainty. If the system she protected was rotting from within, what exactly was she guarding? Her earpiece crackled suddenly, an encrypted frequency, no identifier. A voice, calm and precise. Captain Rostova, debrief in 20 hours. Location, Site Gray, Priority Alpha. Then silence. She closed her eyes, the hum of the rotors steady beneath her feet. 20 hours. Enough time to decide whether to obey or disappear. Outside, the mountains rolled endlessly toward the horizon. The world below looked peaceful again, just like vigilance had after the storm. But she knew better. Peace wasn't the absence of war. It was the pause between betrayals. Eva leaned back in her seat, the black case resting against her thigh, the presidential seal glinting faintly in the dawn. And for the first time, she wondered if the hand that had given her that seal was the same one poisoning the fuel. What do you do when the orders you obey no longer feel clean? The helicopter settled on a landing pad carved into the side of a canyon, its rotors throwing dust and static through the narrow gorge. No signs, no flags, just concrete and shadows. Site Gray wasn't a base. It was a scar someone had decided to hide instead of heal. Eva stepped out into the wind, her boots echoing against the metal. The pad lights went dark behind her the moment she cleared them. Security protocols swallowed the evidence of her arrival. By the time she reached the main doors, the helicopter was already gone, erased from the world like she had never been aboard. The doors hissed open to reveal sterile light and silence. Two men in unmarked fatigues waited without speaking. They didn't salute, didn't even look curious. One scanned her badge, the small black case she carried. The reader flashed green. "Welcome back, Captain," the taller one said, though his tone carried no warmth. Back, as if anyone ever left Site Gray. They led her through corridors of brushed steel and reinforced glass. Every few meters, a camera tracked her movement, its lens whirring softly. No sounds of life, just the mechanical heartbeat of an underground organism that fed on secrets. At last they reached a room the size of a chapel stripped of faith. A table, 2 chairs, and a single spotlight that made the air itself seem thinner. Eva sat. The guards left. The door sealed. 10 seconds later, another door opened on the opposite side. A woman entered. Civilian clothes, charcoal suit, soft gloves. Her hair perfectly in place, her face calm, the kind of calm that came from power without conscience. She carried a tablet under one arm. "Captain Rostova," she said, taking the seat across from her. "Or would you prefer Agent E7? Eva's expression didn't change. "Either works." The woman smiled faintly. "You can call me Director Hart. I oversee strategic logistics oversight which, as you can imagine, includes the activities you've been conducting." "I conduct what I'm ordered to," Eva said. "That's precisely what we appreciate." Hart set the tablet down. On its surface, an image flickered to life, grainy surveillance of the refinery. Fire, bodies, jarred coal's last stand frozen mid-frame. "You made quite a mess." Eva didn't blink. It was already burning before I arrived. Hart tapped a finger against the screen. "Mr. Cole, former intelligence analyst, classified clearance revoked 3 months ago. He contacted you, provided stolen data, and was subsequently killed. Convenient. He was shot by the same people who sabotaged our fuel supply." Hart leaned forward slightly. "And you have proof of that?" Eva reached into her vest, pulled out the small drive Jard had given her and placed it on the table. "He gave me this. Contracts, signatures, coded transfers." The director studied it without touching it. "And have you reviewed the contents?" "Enough to know it's real." Hart nodded slowly, as if confirming something she already knew. "And the name you found?" "Thorne," Eva said. The word lingered like smoke. Hart didn't flinch. "General Marcus Thorne, commander of Northern Operations, a man you've recently assisted." Yes, you believe he's involved. I believe someone wants me to think he is. For the first time, Hart's mask cracked just slightly. Explain. Eva leaned back, her voice steady. The coordinates that sent me to the refinery came through an encrypted channel. Same authorization line as my last 3 missions. I checked the routing metadata. It wasn't from your office. Hart's eyes narrowed. Then whose? I don't know, but whoever it was, they knew I'd find coal, and they wanted me to find that drive. A long silence. The hum of ventilation filled the space between them. Finally, Hart spoke, her tone softer. You think you're being played? I know I'm being used, Eva replied. The question is, by who? Hart sat back, studying her like a specimen. Captain, may I ask you something personal? Go ahead. When you joined the Echelon program, what did they tell you? Eva hesitated. That we operate where oversight ends. And why did you agree? She looked down at her gloved hands. Because someone has to watch the watchers. Hart smiled faintly. That's what they all say at first. The door opened again. A second figure entered, older, broader, in a uniform so black it seemed to drink the light. 4 silver stars gleamed on his collar. General Marcus Thorne. Eva didn't move, but something cold twisted in her chest. Hart gestured toward the chair beside her. General, thank you for joining us. Thorne's face was unreadable. Director. He turned to Eva. Captain. Sir. The air between them felt brittle, like glass stretched thin enough to hum. Hart folded her hands. Captain Rostova has brought us evidence linking the refinery incident to internal corruption. However, the data drive she recovered contains authorization signatures under your command. Thorne's jaw tightened. That's impossible. I said the same, Eva murmured. Hart looked between them, her voice smooth. Then we're faced with 2 options. Either this is a forgery designed to frame you, General, or you are part of the network she's uncovering. Thorne glared at her. And which version fits the narrative you need, Director? Hart's smile didn't waver. The version that keeps the machine running. Eva's gaze shifted to Thorne. Did you send those coordinates? He shook his head. No, I didn't even know you left Vigilance until Command flagged your departure. Then someone's rewriting orders, she said quietly, inside your own chain. Thorne exhaled, slow and furious. You think I don't know what that means? Half the brass has their hands in logistics budgets. They call it efficiency reform. I call it theft. Hart interjected smoothly. Careful, General. No, he said sharply. You wanted the truth. Here it is. We built a system so complex no one can tell where the money ends and the blood begins, and she's the only one still trying to separate them. The room went still. Hart rose, crossing to the far wall. Idealism is expensive, General. You both should know that. She pressed a control on the wall. A screen descended, showing a feed of the refinery's destruction, satellite imagery, time-stamped, magnified. Officially, she said, this site never existed. The men who died there were mercenaries contracted by a private supplier, now dissolved. Their records are already purged. Within 48 hours, there will be no evidence of any incident. Eva's stomach tightened. You're burying it. Hart turned, expression soft but final. I'm protecting the stability of a defense structure that keeps the lights on. You start pulling at these threads, and the whole fabric unravels. Maybe it needs to, Eva said. Hart regarded her quietly. You're a good soldier, Captain, but you still believe truth can save things. It can't. It only burns what it touches. Thorne stood abruptly. That's enough. The director met his gaze without flinching. Sit down, General. He didn't. The silence that followed was the kind that changed careers. Finally, Hart sighed. Very well, Captain Rostova, your access credentials are suspended pending review. You will remain on site for debrief. Eva's eyes hardened. house arrest. Call it containment. And the drive. Hart picked it up delicately, sliding it into a secure case. Evidence. Chain of custody begins now. Thorne's voice was low, dangerous. You're making a mistake. No, General, Hart said softly. I'm preventing one. Hours later, Eva sat alone in a holding suite. Not a cell exactly, but close enough. No windows. No clocks. Just the hum of filtered air and the metallic taste of confinement. Her rifle and case were gone, even her gloves. They'd taken everything but her name. She sat on the cot, elbows on knees, thinking of jarred Cole's final words, of the refinery's smoke curling into the dawn. Somewhere above her, the world was moving on, new reports, new orders, new lies. She whispered almost to herself, if truth burns, then let it burn clean. A faint sound answered, a soft hiss from the wall vent. Then a whisper, nearly mechanical but human enough to send a jolt through her spine. Captain Rostova, are you awake? She froze. Who is this? Someone who still believes you're on the right side. The voice was distorted, genderless. Hart's not your enemy. She's just protecting the funding stream. The real architect is higher. Higher than her. Always is. Check your left boot, compartment 4. Eva reached down, felt along the lining, and found a tiny chip barely larger than a fingernail. She held it up. What is this? A key, the voice said. Encrypted backdoor into Command's internal archive. It'll show you who wrote those authorizations. And you're giving it to me, why? Because someone has to finish what Cole started. Static crackled, then silence. She sat there for a long moment, the chip gleaming faintly in her palm. Every instinct told her it was another layer of the trap, but something deeper, older, whispered that truth didn't hide behind comfort. She slipped it into the cuff of her sleeve just as footsteps echoed outside. The door opened. 2 guards stood there. Captain Rostova, one said, you're cleared to return to quarters, director's orders. She rose slowly, no more questions. None that matter. They escorted her through dim corridors to an elevator that hummed downward instead of up. The air grew colder. Somewhere deep in the structure, unseen machinery churned like a heartbeat too large for its chest. When the doors opened, she found herself in a hangar. Her gear sat on a bench, rifle, pack, black case, as if nothing had happened. Hart waited beside it, arms folded. Where am I going? Eva asked. Hart met her gaze. Home. Eva studied her. Since when do ghosts have homes? Since someone decided you've done enough damage for 1 week. Hart handed her the case. The system adjusts itself, Captain. It always does. Don't mistake that for forgiveness. Eva took it without a word. She could feel the faint vibration through the metal, the hum of the embedded communicator that only activated with direct orders. She knew what it meant. They were releasing her to watch what she'd do next. Hart leaned closer. Be careful who you trust, Rostova, especially when you start trusting yourself. Eva turned away. Advice noted. She walked to the waiting aircraft. The engines warmed to life. As she climbed the ramp, she looked back one last time. Hart stood in the hangar's light, her expression unreadable, part regret, part warning. The ramp closed. The noise grew. Eva sat by the window as the aircraft lifted through the mountain fog, carrying her away from sight gray. In her sleeve, the hidden chip pulsed once faint, alive. Outside, dawn broke again across a world that would never know her name. How far can you go chasing truth before it stops feeling righteous? The flight from sight gray was silent, no destination filed, no comms transmitted. The aircraft followed a path carved into classified airspace, its engines whispering like distant thunder. Eva sat by the window, eyes on the endless stretch of night beneath her, a void broken only by the faint glow of cities she wasn't allowed to land in. She looked down at the case resting on her knees. The presidential seal caught the low cabin light, the same one she'd once taken pride in carrying. Now it felt like an emblem of something she no longer understood. Above it, her reflection wavered in the glass, pale, hollow-eyed, uncertain. Her hand drifted to the cuff of her sleeve, where the tiny chip pressed lightly against her wrist. The voice from the vent echoed in her head. "It'll show you who wrote those authorizations." But information was never just knowledge in her world. It was a weapon, and every weapon demanded a cost. The aircraft touched down at an unmarked strip in the dead plains north of Turkmenistan. No lights, no welcome, just a soft thud of landing gear meeting frozen ground. The rear ramp opened into darkness and wind. Eva stepped out alone. The landscape around her was dust and salt, miles of desolation under a sickly yellow moon. A single structure stood nearby, a weathered outpost left over from a defunct research program. She entered through a half-buried door. The interior was lit by flickering emergency bulbs and humming computers still running on backup power. She had used this place once before, a ghost node, off-grid, left forgotten by design, perfect for ghosts like her. She unlatched her pack, pulled out a compact terminal, and slotted the chip into its core port. The screen lit up in pale blue lines, cascading code like falling snow. Accessing Command Internal Archive. Security override detected. Encryption key valid. Decryption in progress. She leaned forward, breath slow, controlled the old rhythm of surveillance work. The air in the bunker smelled of dust and iron. The hum of the machine filled the silence. And then, a sound she hadn't heard in years. A faint chime. Unlocked. The screen shifted. A list of classified documents unfurled, names she recognized from decades of operations, programs that were never supposed to exist. Ghost Wing, Operation Black Acre, Project Prometheus. Each linked to financial transfers routed through shell contractors, and every transaction terminated under the same oversight code. Authorization Entity, Omega Command/E'/Executive Oversight Division. She froze. The code prefix wasn't military, it was civilian. Directly under the executive branch. The presidential seal wasn't just an access token, it was part of the rot. She clicked deeper. One file caught her eye, a live transmission log. Timestamped 400 hours. Origin Director Hart. Recipient Omega/01. Eva opened it. The video feed was grainy but clear enough. Hart stood in the same room where Eva had been interrogated hours earlier. Her voice was calm. Containment successful. Rostova compromised asset protocol but retained operational value. Suggest continued deployment under observation. She's still useful. Eva sat very still. Her pulse didn't quicken, it slowed. Her training kept it from showing. But something inside her, the part that had once believed in hierarchy, honor, and chain of command, cracked. She replayed the final line again. She's still useful. Useful. Not trustworthy. Not loyal. Just a tool that hadn't worn out yet. For a long moment she couldn't move. The hum of the terminal blurred into the rush of blood in her ears. Every memory from the last year, every mission, every near-death reassembled itself in new light. She'd never been cleaning the machine. She'd been oiling it. The realization hit harder than any bullet. Her voice came out quiet, barely a breath. Who do you serve, Eva? The question had no answer anymore. She pulled up the data tree again, scrolling deeper. A new folder blinked open, encrypted with her own identifier, Rostova, E. She hesitated, then entered her clearance code. The screen unfolded into personnel files, mission reports, psychological evaluations, every detail of her life under echelon command. And then she saw the final entry. Subject E7 Rostova Eva. Status active containment. Behavioral tag predictably defiant. Projected termination window 30 days. Her mouth went dry. She read the line again, slower this time. Projected termination window. They'd already scheduled her end. The keyboard clicked beneath her fingers, each stroke mechanical, deliberate. She copied everything: Hart's transmission, the authorization records, the personal files into a secure portable drive. It wouldn't matter if they tracked it, they already would. But if she was going to die, she wasn't going to die ignorant. The machine pinged once, transfer complete. Then the lights flickered. For an instant, every screen in the bunker glitched, not random static but structured. Text replaced the interface. "You shouldn't have seen that." She froze. A low tone pulsed from the speakers, deep enough to vibrate the walls. The system began auto-locking, one directory after another collapsing into digital ash. The chip was burning itself out, purging evidence. She yanked it free. Smoke curled from the port, the bunker lights dimmed. A faint whine, engines approaching fast. She grabbed her pack, the portable drive, and sprinted to the exit. Outside, the wind had shifted. A black drone hovered low over the plain, its rotors whispering like insects. A spotlight swept across the salt flats. Eva dropped to her knees behind a ridge, pulse steady but breath tight. The drone emitted a faint clicking noise, scanning patterns. She aimed her rifle sight directly at its core, exhaled and fired once. The drone jerked, spiraled, and crashed into the sand. But she knew there'd be more. They weren't going to contain her anymore. They were going to erase her. She moved through the night like a ghost unchained, following the dry riverbeds until dawn smeared the horizon. Her pack weighed heavier now, not because of its contents, but because of what it meant. Inside, it wasn't just data. It was everything the world wasn't meant to know. By midday, she reached an abandoned communications array buried under dunes. She pried open a service hatch, crawled inside, and powered the terminal with her emergency cell. The signal uplink barely reached orbit, but it would be enough. She inserted the drive. "If you want ghosts," she muttered, "then let's haunt you properly." Her fingers flew across the keys. She bypassed security firewalls she herself had once designed, routed through decommissioned satellites. She didn't try to hide, she wanted them to see the signal, to know. Then she began the upload, not to the media, not to foreign hands, but to the archives of record. The one vault they couldn't delete, the Joint Historical Repository, bound by treaty to retain all encrypted transmissions, no matter the source. Once entered, data there couldn't be removed. It would sit, sealed, until the day some bureaucrat decades later opened it and saw the truth. A voice behind her said, "You're making yourself a target." She didn't turn. "Already am." Eli Vance stepped into the light. His uniform was dirty, his face thinner, but his eyes the same, loyal, stubborn. "You're a hard person to find." "I'm not hiding." He gestured to the terminal. "You think dropping classified data into a federal archive is justice?" "No," she said quietly, "it's insurance." He moved closer. "Eva, whatever's on that drive, it'll bury half the command structure." "Maybe that's what needs to happen." He studied her face, seeing the exhaustion carved into it. "And what happens to you?" She looked at the sunrise through the open hatch. "Doesn't matter." "Don't say that." "It's true," she said. "You saw the same thing I did. They're not cleaning the system, they are the system." Vance hesitated. Then, softer, "I followed your trail because I thought you'd be running from them, not toward them." She almost smiled. "You know me better than that." He did, that was the problem. He looked down at the pack. "How much time before they trace this?" "Not enough." The terminal beeped, "Upload complete 92%, almost there." Then a whine from above. Another drone, bigger this time, not surveillance, strike capable. Eva grabbed her rifle. "Get back." The drone dropped altitude, targeting laser sweeping. She fired, hitting one rotor, but it stayed airborne. Vance pulled her behind the support beam as the first missile hit. The bunker shook, sand raining from the ceiling. 70 seconds, she shouted over the roar. Vance nodded, returning fire through the broken hatch. Make it count. Smoke filled the air, acrid and hot. Eva crouched by the terminal, shielding it with her body as debris fell around her. She could barely see the screen, but the numbers kept ticking upward. 94%. 96%. 97%. A second explosion tore through the roof. Shrapnel sliced across her shoulder. She hissed, pressed her hand to the wound, stayed focused. 99%. 100%. Upload complete. She hit the purge command. The terminal flared white, then died. The drone above detonated midair, Vance's last shot hitting the fuel cell dead center. He stumbled back, coughing, as the wreckage fell in molten fragments across the sand. They sat there in the smoke and ruin, breath ragged, the desert quiet again. "You did it," he said finally. Eva looked at the broken terminal. "No, I only lit the fuse." He laughed once, a tired, broken sound. "You always do." She met his gaze. "You need to go." "I'm not leaving you." "Yes, you are." She handed him the drive's decoy copy, identical shell, blank data. "Give this to Thorne, tell him to run it through his channels. It'll buy you time." "And you?" "I'll draw the fire." He shook his head. "Eva, that's suicide." She smiled faintly, so was believing in them. He wanted to argue, but something in her eyes, that calm certainty, stopped him. He knew there was no changing her mind. There never had been. He reached out, pressed a hand to her shoulder, the one uninjured. "You were right about one thing." "What's that?" "Some fights are worth losing." She nodded once, "Then make sure we lose loudly." He left through the back passage, disappearing into the glare of morning. Eva stood alone among the wreckage. The sun climbed higher, turning the dunes to fire. She lifted her eyes toward the horizon, where the faint shadow of a new aircraft appeared, sleek, fast, coming straight for her position. Her hand brushed the case at her side, the seal now cracked and blackened from heat. Once it had been her authority, now it was just metal. She whispered, "If truth burns, let it burn clean." Then she raised her rifle, steady and silent, and faced the oncoming storm. What remains of a person when the mission ends, but the war inside does? The sky over the Amrak desert was the color of gunmetal. Heat shimmered off the wreckage where the communications array had once stood. The air smelled of iron and static. Smoke crawled low over the dunes, twisting in slow ribbons that caught the morning light. Eva Rostova stood in the center of it, a silhouette against the ruin, rifle hanging at her side, uniform torn, face streaked with dust. The last of the drones circled once overhead, then veered east. Her signal was dead, her body heat signature lost among the burning metal. For a long moment, the desert was utterly still. She lowered herself to one knee, pain radiating through her shoulder. Her breathing slowed. The noise of battle receded until all that remained was wind, the same wind that had whispered through every battlefield she'd crossed. This was what the end always sounded like. Not trumpets, not cheers, just silence deciding what it would remember. She looked toward the horizon. A faint column of dust moved there, a convoy, maybe rescue, maybe pursuit. It didn't matter. The data was gone from her hands now, buried in a vault the system couldn't erase. Someday someone would open that archive and see the truth. Maybe they'd understand it. Maybe they'd just file it away. But it would exist, and existence was victory enough. Her hand brushed the blackened case at her belt. The seal was cracked clean through the eagle's wings. "Guess you broke too," she whispered. The radio on her chest hissed, faint but alive. "Va, Eva, do you copy?" Eli Vance, static, chewed his words. "I read," she answered, voice hoarse. "We're out, I made the drop. Thorne's got it. Whole net's lighting up, they're trying to shut everything down. You need exfil now." She smiled faintly. No exfil, Eli, not this time. Don't do that, I'm sending a bird. Negative, you still have a mission. Get to the safe line and disappear. That's an order. He swore softly through static. You said once ghosts still matter, don't become one yet. She closed her eyes. We all become ghosts, Eli. The only choice is what haunts the world when we're gone. Then the line went dead. Hundreds of miles away in the secure command chamber beneath forward operating base vigilance, alarms blinked across screens. Data packets, dozens, then hundreds cascaded into the military network before vanishing behind encrypted firewalls. Officers shouted, systems locked, overrides failed. General Thorne stood in the center of it all, face pale under the cold blue light of the monitors. He held the decoy drive Eli had delivered, still hot from travel, and watched as command scrambled to contain what they couldn't understand. He didn't know what Eva had uploaded, only that the storm she'd unleashed was real. A young lieutenant turned to him. Sir, they're saying someone breached executive oversight channels, level Omega authorization. Thorne's eyes hardened. Rostova. They're calling it treason. He shook his head. No, it's testimony. Across the room, Director Hart appeared on the main screen, her image fractured by interference. General Thorne, you will ground all aircraft immediately. No one leaves your perimeter. This is a containment order. Thorne stared back. Containment of what, Director? The truth. Hart's voice stayed level. You have no idea what she's done. Yes, he said quietly. I think I finally do. He turned to his staff. Cut external feeds now. Sir. Do it. The screen flickered, Hart's face vanishing into static. The room fell silent except for the hum of generators. Thorne exhaled, long and heavy, then looked at Eli Vance, who stood near the doorway, his uniform scorched, eyes bloodshot. Where is she? Eli hesitated. Desert, Amrak Basin, I don't think she. Get me a bird, Thorne ordered. Sir, the director. Let her send whatever reprimand she wants, Thorne snapped. We're going. The horizon blurred beneath the rotors. The desert stretched endless and gold. Thorne sat rigid beside the open ramp, headset pressed to one ear. He'd never felt smaller, never more human. Command could strip his stars tomorrow, he didn't care. Somewhere out there, a woman he'd once laughed at had just torn open the veil of the empire they served. The pilot's voice cracked through. Sir, heat signature ahead, one body, minimal movement. Set us down. The helicopter hovered, kicking up waves of dust. Thorne jumped before the skids touched ground, boots sinking into warm sand. The wreckage of the comms array loomed like bones. And there, by the broken terminal, Eva. She was conscious barely. The burn on her shoulder had spread, blood dried black beneath the fabric. Her rifle lay beside her, magazine empty. He knelt, removing his gloves. You don't follow orders well, Captain. Her lips twitched. You either, General. He pressed a canteen to her mouth. She took a small sip, winced, then looked past him to the sky. They'll come for you next. Let them, he said. I'm tired of pretending we're the good ones. Her eyes softened. You finally figured it out. Yeah, he glanced at the horizon where the sun burned red. Took your storm to show me. A pause, heavy, tender in its own way. Then she said, you need to go. If the drone net reacquires this zone. Not leaving you. You have to. He shook his head. No, I owe you too much. She smiled faintly. You don't owe me, just don't let them bury it. He understood she didn't mean her, she meant the truth. He took her hand, cold, trembling. I'll make sure they remember. Not my name, she whispered, just what it meant. When the next drone came, it didn't fire. It only circled once, then vanished into the haze as if something unseen had called it off. Maybe Hart had seen the feed. Maybe she decided one death was enough. Thorne radioed for medevac anyway, though he already knew. Her pulse was fatting, her breathing shallow. She didn't fight it. She just looked at him, eyes half closed, and said, "You ever wonder why people like us keep doing it?" He swallowed, because no one else will. "Maybe," she murmured, "or maybe we just forget how to stop." Then softer, as the wind carried her words away. Tell Eli the ghosts made it home." Her hand relaxed. The desert went quiet again. Thorne sat beside her long after the medics arrived, long after the paperwork began. He stayed until the sun bled out over the dunes. When they finally took her body, he stood alone, the cracked case still in his hand. He traced the broken seal with his thumb and whispered, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." Months later, the world went on pretending. Reports were redacted, files sealed, names erased, but not everything could be contained. Buried deep within the Joint Historical Repository, a series of encrypted packets began surfacing in declassification cycles. Each file labeled simply E7 Field Reports. Analysts found contracts, communications, signatures, proof of corruption threaded through the highest levels. Investigations started quietly. Some ended careers, some ended lives, and somewhere within those ripples, a slow kind of justice began to breathe. Director Hart resigned without statement. General Thorne was reassigned to a logistics desk far from any battlefield, an exile that suited him more than anyone guessed. Every morning he opened the small folder Eva had left him, a single photograph, creased at the edges. The links she'd driven through hell, half buried in snow, the mountains rising behind it. On the back, in her handwriting, "We were the quiet ones." He kept it framed in glass. Eli Vance vanished from active duty 6 months later. Rumor said he transferred to a civilian program in Geneva, teaching crisis response ethics. Others whispered he'd gone underground, helping whistleblowers reach safety. Either way, when the wind blew through certain valleys at night, radio operators still swore they heard his call sign. Ghost 1. Alive. And as for Eva Rostova, officially, she never existed. Her personnel file ended on a line of static, but soldiers told stories in quiet corners of mess halls about the woman who carried a broken seal and fought wars no one else could see. Some said she'd been disavowed. Others said she'd been sent somewhere higher, beyond names and ranks. No one agreed. Everyone remembered. There's a place in the mountains where the snow never fully melts. On clear days, sunlight catches a fragment of metal buried in the ice, the faint outline of a badge, cracked through the center, its engraving almost gone. If you look close, you can still read 3 words etched beneath the seal. For those unseen. And maybe that's what she wanted all along, not recognition, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement that invisible things matter. The small, stubborn acts that keep the world from collapsing. The choices no one witnesses but everyone benefits from. Because courage was never meant to be loud. And truth, once released, doesn't beg to be believed. It simply waits for someone brave enough to find it again. The desert wind moved over the ruins, whispering through broken steel and forgotten wires. Somewhere far below, beneath the noise of governments and wars, the signal she'd sent kept echoing, weak, persistent, impossible to erase. A ghost's heartbeat still transmitting. And in that unseen pulse lived the final truth she left behind. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.